I don't know why it took me this long to finally get around to Lies of P, even though everywhere online, everyone's saying this is the best Souls-like. The one that feels legitimately like something of FromSoft quality. I just finished a base game, absolutely loved it, and really want to gush about it. I absolutely adore FromSoft games. I've completed all of their Soulsbornes and Armored Core 6, but I've never really ventured outside the official FromSoft realm to check out other Souls-likes besides just being a para-content tourist by religiously watching Iron Pineapple's videos about them. As a result, I got a wishlist and library containing a bunch of games mentioned in those videos that I'm trying to get around to actually playing, and what better way to start than by beating Lies of P. Now, I can't say whether this is the best Souls-like given that I haven't played enough of them, but hopefully if you're in a similar boat as me, where Lies of P was always on your radar, yet you've never jumped in, hopefully this video reminds you that this game exists, and also that you should absolutely play it. Probably the most important aspect that Lies of P nails is the feeling of playing the game being so similar to a FromSoft title, but in a meaningful way that isn't just, oh, it controls exactly the same. No, I'm talking like it nails the vibes of a desolated, beautiful world with incredible music, lore text that primes your imagination, animations that read well while looking incredible, sound effects that are unbelievably satisfying, really cool levels, like pretty much all those invisible amenities that you don't notice when done well, but immediately clock when done not as well are meticulously handled. Not to pull the "it just works" phrase, but the entire playthrough felt smooth throughout, like there legitimately was never any point where it significantly fell off. The levels remained fun to explore, and encounters always felt fresh and creative. I feel like just looking at footage of this game when I first heard about it already had it sticking out to me in both how familiar the gameplay looked, on top of the really unique premise of puppet enemies, on top of overall just giving off New Age Bloodborne vibes, which has been an oasis in the desert for Bloodborne enjoyers. This insane pitch of playing as Pinocchio stalking the streets in a fancy coat, butchering clankers instead of beasts very much was a world I wanted to explore. Feels just as visceral, getting oil stains all over your coat instead of blood. And so far I've just been trying to glaze Lies of P by equating it to FromSoft, but honestly, in a lot of ways it does things better without reinventing the wheel. You still got your Souls-like staples. There's bonfires that restore your health and healing charges, plus respawns enemies. You got stamina and iframe dodging and blocking and lights and heavies, yada yada. But then every single one of those aspects has been meaningfully considered in interesting and fun ways. Like, there's this weapon crafting system where you can make your own wacky custom weapons by mix and matching different handles and blades. The handle is the moveset and scaling, while the blade is damage, with both giving their own weapon art. You got the Sekiro arms, so you can pull out different gadgets, where I mostly use the grapple hook because oh my god, this thing is sick. There's also freeform fashion going on, because your clothes do not have anything to do with your carrying capacity and defense, because that's all done with these defense parts. They're kind of like FromSoft rings / talismans, so they don't affect your looks and just do their effects. What I really like about how Lies of P does this is that instead of having 4 slots for head, chest, gloves, and pants, where they all affect the same stats, making it harder to min-max if you do want to forego fashion, here with defense parts, they're all sorted for different types of defense. So like this slot is for physical damage, this one is for elements, this one's for statuses, and the last one is for the different types of physical like slash or thrust. It goes how you'd expect. The heavier the defense part, the more resistance it'll give. This provides the best of both worlds, where you can min-max your build against whatever you're fighting, and you get to freely customize how you look. The only issue I got though is that I wish this feeling of freeform customization was also there for the weapons, because despite the Build-A-Bear Bloodborne bonks, in practice, because there's still a similar upgrade system as FromSoft's, where you gotta find the equivalent of upgrade shards, chunks, slabs, etc., you can't really switch weapon parts as freely if you want to be doing max damage, because you still gotta commit those limited upgrade materials on whatever you're already using to keep pace with the progression. But for actual combat gameplay, whew, Lies of P cooked something tough. If you're out of healing flasks, you can earn back 1 just by continuing to fight and live, meaning there's always comeback potential in extremely hype boss fights as a result. Dodging, blocking, or just moving out of the way are all viable methods of avoiding damage. And while you ideally should parry stuff by timing your blocks right, it's easier said than done, and so unless you're a god gamer, realistically you should be weaving all of these tools in and out of the fight, which feels incredible because you have the mental security of knowing you can approach the game however you like when it comes to how you intuitively prevent attacks from landing. There was absolutely no friction ever in terms of how do I even avoid getting hit by this, which was an issue that was starting to creep up in Elden Ring. Doesn't matter if an attack attack has a solution, the issue is how well it's conveyed to the player in a split second. Plus, if that solution has precedence that was built upon and taught by the game, so it's a definitively intended mechanic. There's massively meaningful differences between your lights and heavies besides just the timing of knowing when to get in quick lights versus when you have the time to get in a heavy or even a charged heavy. Not only are there tons of heavy attacks in this game that either have massive range or adjust your character's position, which makes these attacks much more fluid to use in more situations, but charged heavies also put enemies in a vulnerable state if they have a white outline around their health, which is Lies of P's version of the Sekiro posture break or staggering in Elden Ring. You hit them enough / parry enough and you get the white bar. This feels like a very intentional design that the combat is balanced around, since it's clear enemies are given enough gaps in their behavior where you can find the window to go for the charged heavy on top of the more fluid ways you can weave them into your playstyle. It feels really good to be using more of your moves all the time versus mostly doing lights as a default. And personally, this system just makes staggering enemies super satisfying because it feels awesome knocking a big bad down from a charged heavy versus from a random other attack. Also, I really like how the items are done in this game. Because there's no spells, Lies of P can let you have the two tracks both for your consumables, which is amazing for ease of selection in the middle of combat. I organized it by putting the heals and status cleansers on top while putting the offensive stuff like grindstone and throwables on the bottom. Oh, the grindstone is a neat addition because of how the game makes weapon durability actually matter instead of once in a blue moon if there's the rare enemy that spews corrosive acid or something, or if you're Dark Souls 2. So instead of weapon durability being something you annoyingly upkeep with some consumable you gotta buy, here you get a grindstone that's really analogous to Monster Hunter whetstones, where it's infinite use, so it's more about just finding the time to upkeep your weapon. Now, this doesn't really matter when exploring a level. You'll always be able to use the grindstone just by virtue of not always being in danger, unlike a boss fight. However, there is a dedicated faction of enemies that can inflict the decay status condition, which rapidly drains weapon durability, so it does mean that this mechanic can sparingly come up during exploration, which is a great ratio since it avoids becoming a persistent annoyance. On top of that, the grindstone is also packaged with a free refreshing weapon coating that you can even build into to also repair your weapon. Like, it just feels that this whole dynamic was given a lot of thought as to how it would be used throughout the game to not just become another selectively arbitrary, realistic, and annoying upkeep mechanic in lieu of actually purposeful depth with gameplay in mind. Then the consumables feel hugely impactful and actually make me want to use them regularly. I feel like in FromSoft games, you typically don't think about throwing bombs and knives or whatnot unless you're particularly focusing on them. But in Lies of P, they made it so that these items have massive efficacy, but you can't carry a lot of them at once, so you'll have like dozens in supply while only carrying like 3 of a thing. This leads to so much more natural use throughout the game, since you'll be picking up a ton of them off the ground. And if there's a particularly rough enemy or annoyingly placed ranged guy, you just use them real quick to help get through the section, and then you pull from supply at the next bonfire. They basically felt like another free resource that refreshes, like your healing charges, and you still have the option to buy them from merchants if you want to go down the route of spamming them. Oh, and the consumables that cleanse stats effects are consolidated, so you don't have a bunch of different color swapped shrubbery for bleeds and poisons and toxic and frost and death. And Lies of P got blue drink for elemental statuses and yellow for everything else. That's it. Monster Hunter figured this out ages ago with consolidating all the blight berries into a null berry. Oh, we gotta do the same thing here with future FromSoft titles, okay? Then there's this stuff that's nice to have. If you die in a boss arena, it drops your souls outside, so you don't have to get in there and teleport out if you needed those souls. It tells you how close you are to leveling up with a bar under your souls. You can pop those soul consumables that instantly give you some in any menu that has you spending souls, whether it's leveling or shopping. There's a red circle on the ground telling you exactly where you need to stand to do the critical animation off a posture break so you don't have to vibes it out and possibly miss your window. The fast travel menu lets you know whether an NPC's quest has progressed and has new dialogue, which I infinitely prefer over outright having to either remember or write down notes and then periodically check in with NPCs if I think I got something done. And this is more subjective, but I really like the animations in this game. Though this also kind of ties into the world design, because the choice to have twitchy puppets and zombies, while it is some contemporary horror type of vibe that I blame Five Nights at Freddy's for, still works really well for being both unsettling and also really readable in a fight. Souls-like games are moving in a direction where they have to find ways to mix up the timing for incoming attacks to remain challenging for an increasingly more experienced player base. And that's how we get the hilariously delayed attacks of Elden Ring that for a lot of people can kind of bring them out of it to see a big dude looking to swing and then awkwardly holding it for way too long. In Lies of P, there's plenty of attacks with long windups to throw you off, but for the most part, they're all incredibly animated instead of looking stiff. And this is something that I think really takes advantage of how there's creepy robot enemies and zombies, because yeah, all you gotta do to make these delayed attacks more readable is exaggerate other aspects of their movement, whether they frenetically twitch or quite literally wind up attacks. attacks. It doesn't look out of place at all. You mix that with this game's incredible sound design, and it makes for such a satisfying experience to take in when anything is happening on screen. In fact, this also ties into the readability because it's a lot more understandable when a big bad is cocking back their arm while there's a loud whirring noise or screech as you anticipate their attack. And then it also does the Sekiro thing where enemy go red means big danger, can't block this attack, with a very similar sound cue. But yeah, even without the utility, like damn, the sound and visual feedback makes it fun to parry and hit things in this game. Really does avoid the problem of making constant metal colliding sound like. Even more so because the enemy design is unbelievably goated, since Lies of P is totally willing to not only have a ton of unique designs, but also not be afraid to only use them like once or twice ever, and then just having completely fresh enemies area after area. Which, like, coming from Elden Ring, wow, that's refreshing. But that's more a discussion on the pros and cons of open worlds, because like the rest of the Soulsborne games are also pretty good about enemy variety. Anyways, the rank and file enemies somehow have really novel aspects to them that let you interact with them in additional ways outside of the default hit them a couple times and moving on. Like, as an example, a lot of guys, if you parry them, you'll break their weapon, and you can even unlock a skill to outright stumble them. Which is cool that doing something as unnecessary as parrying an enemy that you really don't have to since it dies so easily is still something that you might want to do every now and then if the situation calls for it. And those situations come up given that there's plenty of encounter variety across all the levels too. We got the classic poison swamp, rafter beams, pressure plates, gank squads, etc. So you might want to parry projectiles when tightroping because you don't want to dodge, or buy some time to breathe with the parry when dealing with multiple enemies. Like, dodging may be the default response because it's just easier to position when exploring, but it's nice to want to naturally do another option like parrying without it feeling mandatory. There's also enough bigger enemies scattered throughout that are slightly longer fights and warrant parrying as a result, meaning that this mechanic isn't only relegated to bosses and mini-bosses, and the game makes sure to keep you engaged with it throughout. I also love details like these big dudes having a blue goop canister on their back you can break for a free stagger. Enemies and encounters that make you have to think differently to figure them out keeps the gameplay fresh, especially if it involves figuring out how to disable level hazards. Which, by the way, the levels are stunning to look at and a joy to play through. They even do well the FromSoft classic of positioning geometry where you tend to move your camera in such a way to naturally focus your attention on striking visuals. However, this is one area that I think FromSoft definitely still does better. Like, I still think about the first time I played Elden Ring stumbling into perfect painting-esque vistas. Not to mention having incredible interconnected level design that actually maps out a world that could exist beyond just being a video game level. Lies of P is mostly straightforward in level progression, with occasional paths that loop back around and unlock shortcuts, but they're pretty much all contained within a level and not this interconnected and elaborate web of levels that can jump between each other. But like, that directness could also be a good thing if you get lost easily, because I'm someone who unironically uses those shiny coins and glowing rocks to mark stuff to better navigate FromSoft games. Then there's the music, which again, FromSoft clears, but Lies of P honestly also still really damn good too. Like, all the boss music sounds amazing, but I'm not a music guy, so I can't really describe why that well, besides just affirming that they feel epic and riveting for the fights. The only criticism is that they kind of all give off the same feeling despite sounding different. Like, the only one that actually gave a different vibe was the King of Puppets because it's really solemn, but the rest of them just feel constantly fast and epic, which isn't a bad thing. It's probably more that FromSoft has like a whole squad of prodigies doing their music, so different songs are just gonna have uniquely different feelings and styles coming from a variety of people. But then there's these records you can find throughout the game that you can play to change up the songs you hear while doing your character upkeep in the hub world. And oh my god, these are bangers. A very cool diegetic, dare I say, Souls-like thing to do, because listening to these also increases your humanity. Which brings me to the story, which is more straightforward than a FromSoft title, but still ultimately needing a dive into the lore and item descriptions to fully know what's going on. But the basic premise of waking up as Geppetto's puppet, learning how to Detroit become human in a world that only just recently descended into hell, is a nice departure from most FromSoft worlds where the norm is everything being Jover for generations. The primary gimmick, as the title implies, is that lying will make you human, as it's something puppets are incapable of doing. As you progress, you'll run into situations with NPCs where you're given a timed dialogue option where you can lie. In this starts off pretty harmless, like it's basically your character being polite, cheering up a sweet old lady about her looks while she's sick. But then you get actually impactful lies later on, like who to trust, or whether a character ought to know key information if it might be unbearable for them. I really enjoyed this motif about the nature of lies and what it means to be human, because the game has characters whose life circumstances and viewpoints are able to present this motif in many ways, especially because in the lore, it's possible for the puppets to become capable of awakening an ego and overriding their servile bot brain. Not to spoil names, but some vague examples of interesting character dynamics include an awakened puppet subtly manipulating a human's life, a human who despises lies and seeks to ascend humanity into a state so powerful and godlike as to be able to make truths absolute, because I guess with unstoppable power, there's no need to lie, a puppet who was once human trying to do his best to save humans while being controlled to do otherwise, a godly man of the cloth who becomes deceitful upon giving in to greed and ends up becoming a monster. Like this whole interweave of what makes someone a human, puppet, or monster and how one moves around that triangular spectrum was really captivating to think about. Because yeah, while being humane and kind is ideal, in reality people are put into situations where they find themselves controlled by forces out of their hands like they were a puppet. And sometimes people are driven to monstrous depravity by things like unchecked power, awful life conditions, maybe even a disease that turns you into a zombie, you know, all kinds of monsters. And puppetry. Like, a zombie is just a puppet to a disease if you think about it. Here's where I spoil some lore text, but that disease is notably something that only exists because of men being monstrous. Because like there's these bizarre lore entries about how some one-winged metallic angel came to Earth and tried to figure out how to make humans immortal. I don't know the specifics, but this seems to be what ultimately leads to why humanity in Lies of P is able to make puppets and have all this crazy tech in the first place. There's this blue stuff called ergo found from these crystals that grow naturally that can be used as a crazy energy source to power all the puppets and technological marvels that turned the game's main setting of Krat, which used to be a backwater town, into a bustling city. Except it turns out that this stuff is made out of people's souls. Clearly, distilled indomitable will of the human spirit is a great energy source, and these crystals seem like they're the result of people getting sick with something called the petrification disease. Now, I'm no lore expert, but I'm guessing that this was the result of that one-winged angel god thingy trying to grant immortality to people and turn them into rocks. I don't know. But then there's these alchemists that exist as a faction in the game, still trying to pursue immortality like you'd expect biblically accurate alchemists to do, and in their mad scientist shenanigans messing around with the petrification disease, they went and found a way to turn people into either zombies or superhumans, and now we got a zombie outbreak going on. Yeah, alchemists experimenting on people isn't exactly based, and also the zombie outbreak was a means to try and extract massive amounts of ergo from the general population because Mr. Man wanted to become the manifestation of truth absolute as a god. That is such a cool foil to how you're a bot trying to become more human by learning how to do lateral thinking, and gaining the empathy needed to exist in that headspace of feelings not yet calcified into tangible thoughts before they're vocalized, aka becoming capable of lying. Like, sure, if you're omnipotent or omniscient or whatever, then yeah, there's no point in lying to gain something because you wield power so untouchable that there's no space for uncertainty anymore when you already know and have the means to actualize. But that's like so far removed from the human experience where we don't know everything, which makes lying and contradictions just crop up as a result. And at that human level of operation, lying can be used to scam someone while demanding payments in the form of gift cards, just as much as pretending you know a girl at a bar to get a creep off of her. Truly a beautiful thing and what makes trust so meaningful and feel good. Which, speaking of trust, the puppets have like these binding rules called the Grand Covenant that basically prevent them from ever disobeying humans or hurting them. So since Lies of P has you playing in a situation where they're all going rampant like a bunch of bloodborne beasts at the same time as a zombie outbreak, hilarious timing by the way, you very much pick up on how this is also the result of man being not good, actually quite evil, pulling all the puppet strings. Something only possible because the puppets are powered by ergo, which is also why they're even able to awaken a human ego in the first place. The puppet frenzy is also a deranged ergo farming scheme that mirrors the alchemist zombie outbreak in that the end goal isn't to ascend to godhood, but rather because there's a bigly smart person who's trying to get back something they lost by any means necessary. That thing they lost very much the result of them acting like a cold robot in the first place, and so now they have massive regrets manifesting in a destructive manner instead of going to therapy. TLDR, the city of Krat is a goddamn zombie robot clown fiesta, and the perfect place to learn how to become human by knowing what not to do. Maybe the best humans are the robots that overcame great clanker behavior rather than the people that were born human. I don't know. Maybe the real lesson is you shouldn't have to dominate something to trust it. A god doesn't lie because it doesn't need to, but a puppet doesn't lie because it's being compelled. Be a human and acknowledge your limitations of existing in a space of uncertainty where lies come up. See, this is why I love video games as a medium's capability of doing these lore text bits and the sense of discovery you get from exploring the world. It primes the mind, makes me stop and think about these ideas while I'm playing, and these Dark Souls-esque games really do that for me. There's just so much possibility and anticipation that comes from getting engrossed with these games, and the fact that Lies of P is hitting its notes on these world-building details on top of the gameplay really does speak to its quality and makes me okay with putting it up there alongside the FromSoft bangers. The idea of something can be just as, if not even more captivating as the thing itself, and these games have a tendency to drive your imaginations wild when looking at their worlds and flavor text, not being certain if any of this is foreshadowing the way you expect. Fine details littered with compelling ideas is one way to do that, like when reading about all this talk of immortal god angels, but it could also be more direct without showing the whole hand, like when reading notes about what's obviously going to be the boss of the area being a green monster and wondering what the hell this thing was going to look like, or catching a glimpse of who knows what in a collapsed cathedral and questioning what I even saw. So yeah, this overall level of attentiveness on all fronts is what ultimately got me saying that Lies of P goes beyond being a Souls-like into even being a FromSoft-like, because the level of polish here is just unreal. Not gonna lie, I got kind of scared seeing the Unreal logo given all the unoptimized Unreal 5 jank that's coming out nowadays, but then I remember, oh wait, this came out 3 years ago and this is Unreal 4. And also their studio, Round 8, isn't led by insanely corporate Jack Welch man who broke capitalism types who are greedy little St. James rolling monsters that are puppets of shareholders and capital. Because look, Lies of P devs actually got monetary bonuses for hitting sales targets instead of a pizza party. Actually, I forgot, pizza party is old school. The expectation nowadays is that if you do well, you actually get laid off. Here's some AI generated pizza. Yeah, maybe if you pay your devs well and give them time to optimize the game and live their lives, that positive vibe goes back into their product and they'll make better games. Wow, who would have thought? But making good games apparently has nothing to do with making money. So if you gamers could do billionaires a favor and be happy with owning nothing while spending all your money on Monopoly Go and the inevitable Google Stadia clones when gaming hardware becomes prohibitively expensive because of data centers eating up all the RAM, that'd be great.
Good boy, good boy, good boy.
That's it from me. Go play Lies of P if you haven't already. I'll definitely get around to playing the Overture DLC at some point and wish the devs the best on whatever they're doing next. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, and thanks for watching. Okay, plot twist, in the time after making this whole video, I was made aware that NeoWiz's site went and listed a job posting for an AI creator for Round 8, which is incredibly disappointing to see given AI's massive ethical and qualitative issues. Now, we don't really know anything about the Lies of P sequel besides that it's in production right now, but my fear at the moment is that it becomes another Unreal 5 AI slot mess. This isn't a guarantee that the sequel is going to be some vibe-coded, unoptimized, and ugly-looking mess, as the translated job description does detail that this person will be using generative AI for concept art, as well as using AI to turn 2D images into 3D models, and being able to have AI make a bunch of 3D models for asset libraries. Notably, the requirements want this position to be able to refine these things to final product standards, so it's not just generative AI straight to going gold, as they're going to have to be knowledgeable in traditional 2D and 3D tools. This is the type of process that if done well, players aren't going to notice, but what no one wants to see is like a chopped Crimson Desert AI painting. But regardless, still planning on getting the DLC when it's on sale. However, whatever sequel comes next, I'm now significantly more skeptical of, as I clutch my RAM tightly and cry over my increasing water and electrical bills. Okay, video's actually over now.